Alright guys, this is grade 9 IXL F5. A few things you need to know about this IXL. One is there's kind of a neat thing that they do with the IXL here, and it's that we're used to usually, so far we've been calculating and you'd get an answer, you round it to the nearest 2 decimal places, or in IXL they say use 3.14 for pi. And they do that in grade 8 because you're still getting used to what pi is. But something they do in grade 9, and you'll see this is getting you ready for what you'll see in later years as well, is they actually ask you to give a more exact answer by keeping pi as part of your answer. What that means is, like, let's say for example you were to have a circle like this, wonderful drawing of a circle here, and let's say you have a radius, and we'll make the radius like 10 centimeters, right? If what you're used to doing so far is if you want the circumference of this, you would say, okay, I'm going to use my formula, circumference equals 2 times pi times the radius, and you would take your radius here and you'd say, well, since I know the radius is 10, let me just take this formula, get the r out of there and replace it with the actual number that I know here, which is going to be 10 centimeters. So you would type in my case 10, if you don't feel like drawing any more often than is necessary. Move out of the way, there we are. All right, 2 times pi times a very tiny little 10 here. And so what we're used to seeing is you do in your calculator, 2 times 10 is 20, 20 times pi gives me 62.8 something, blah, 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 and then I write that number in. In these IXLs, you see they want the exact answer, so an actual exact answer here would be, okay, well, it's 2 times 10 times pi. 2 times 10 is going to be 20, so my exact answer is just going to be 20 pi. I leave pi in the answer. So the way you would write the answer for a circumference of a circle with a radius of 10 is 20 pi. I forgot to put my units in here. I know some of you guys are screaming who remember to put units. Make sure to put your units. So there you go. Okay, so this would be your answer. That's an exact answer, 20 pi. So the pi is in the answer. Right, and if we see that in the question they have here, this example is one I just made up over here. If you see the question they have here, they're saying, okay, the radius of a circle is 2 inches. We see a radius of 2 inches. What is the length of a 180-degree arc? So first you get your circumference. You say, okay, circumference is going to be equal to 2 times pi times my radius, which in this case is 2 inches. And then if I want the full circumference, I'm going to simplify this on the right. I'm not going to actually do 2 times pi in my calculator, get 6.28 whatever, and multiply that by 2, 12.56. I'm not going to go into decimals and all that. I'm just going to say, let me do 2 times 2 is 4. And then my answer, I'm going to keep it like this. For the full circumference, it's 4 pi inches. That's my full circumference. That's not my final answer to the question, because here it's asking me about part of the circumference. It's asking me about the arc, in this case of 180 degrees. So there's a few ways I can solve this. The way that you'll see is useful for when you get to more complicated ones later on in this IXL is you say, okay, let me take the full circumference, which is 4 pi, and I'm going to set up my proportion, which is always arc over circumference equals central angle, in this case 180 degrees, over 360. So when you're doing these calculations, pi is just a number, but you can sort of think of it the same way you would work with a variable. Like if this were x, like if this said 4x, you do 4x times 180 divided by 360 to find out what you'd put for arc. So 4 times 180 divided by 360, if you do that calculation, you'll end up getting 2 pi as your arc. So you wouldn't write 6.28, you would actually just write, like if you do 4 times 180 divided by 360 in your calculator, you'll get that that is 2, and the pi is just along for the ride. So your answer would here be 2 pi, and then you submit that and you got it right. Okay, so let's see that again. Let's see a couple more examples. The radius of a circle is 8 kilometers. What is the length of a 45-degree arc? So again, you say to yourself, I want the answer in exact form, including pi in my answer. That actually makes the calculations a little bit easier, and it makes the answer absolutely exact. Okay, so in this one here, I know that I've got a radius of 8. I'm going to use my same formula for circumference. Circumference equals 2 times pi times my radius, which in this case is 8. And with that, I'm able to calculate that my circumference is going to be, you can see it here, 2 times 8 is 16. 16 times pi is just 16 pi. My circumference is 16 pi kilometers here. That's the circumference of my whole circle. It's a pretty big circle, right? But since I only want 45 degrees of it, I can then use my proportion. I know that if I take the total circumference here that I have, 16 pi kilometers, and I put it in my proportion, which includes arc up top, which I don't know, and that's what I want to find out. Arc goes here. I know the central angle over 360 goes over here. My central angle, 45 degrees, that goes here, 45 degrees. And then I put that over 360 to set up my proportion. So in order to find the missing point, I do 16 pi times 45 divided by 360. The pi is just along to the right here in your calculator. You would actually type 16 times 45 divided by 360, and that would give you 2 pi, right? The pi is along with that. 16 times 45 divided by 360 in your calculator gives you 2. You just keep the pi with that, and you end up with an answer of 2 pi kilometers. Right? That's actually the exact same answer we got on the last question. Gets you wondering if maybe all the answers. And once you get to more difficult ones in the IXL, you'll see that once you get around 75 or so in the IXL, things get a little bit more difficult in that they don't just give you a radius and say, give us the arc, right? They don't just give you a radius and the central angle and say, give us the arc. They actually give you different parts of that proportion you've been working with, and you just have to find the missing one. So it requires a little bit more flexibility, right? And this one here, it's giving you the diameter of the circle is 8 inches. So, well, right off, you know, if the diameter is 8 inches, I'm used to working with radius here. I think I'm going to change that into radius. You don't have to, right? Diameter is perfectly good for finding circumference, but it's easier for me to explain if I say, okay, let's immediately jump to saying that the radius is 4 inches here. And if I have the radius, or even if I have the diameter, I can get the circumference, again, in an exact amount. I can get the circumference in terms of pi. So I'm going to do, remember, circumference is equal to 2 times pi times the radius, which in this case is 4. So if I keep that in mind, I find out that the exact circumference is going to be 8 pi inches. Right? This is my circumference. Now let me set up that proportion that I've been using over and over again, right? It's going to be, like a proportion is always 2 fractions equal to each other. I know I've got to put arc up here, and in this case arc is pi inches. That might feel a little weird to be writing pi as a number, but that's the length of the arc here. It's pi inches. I know the circumference goes in the bottom left, and that's 8 pi. And then I know that 360, the number 360 always goes down here, and I'm trying to find out what number would go up here. Okay, so I can immediately jump to doing fish method here. 360 times pi divided by 8 pi will give me my answer. Now you might want to, before doing that, you might decide, well, these pi's here kind of feel a little complicated, so am I allowed to cancel these out like this, like I would in a regular fraction? Yeah, you are. You can change this into 1 over 8 equals x over 360, and then do 360 times 1 divided by 8 to get your answer, which is going to be 45 degrees. That's perfectly good. If you want to keep the pi's in there, it'll work as well. 360 times pi is 360 pi. 360 pi divided by 8 pi, the pi's will knock each other out, and you have 360 divided by 8 to get 45. Okay, let's do another example like this to see, again, how you do it. Let's say here it tells you you've got a radius of 4 inches, and it wants you to find what the angle is if the arc is 3 pi inches long. Okay, so whenever you get these questions, it's important not to panic. Just figure out what you know, and based on what you know, put it in the right spot in that proportion and solve the proportion here, right? So I've got a radius of 4 inches. That's going to be r equals 4. And that means that the circumference, since the circumference is going to be 2 times pi times, whoops, we lost it. If the circumference is going to be 2 times, circumference equals 2 times pi times your radius of 4, then that means that your circumference, just like the last example, I think it's the same thing, ends up being that the circumference is 8 pi. We got our circumference. Okay, If that's what my circumference is, then that means that that's the number I'm going to put in the bottom left of my proportion, right? I put circumference in the bottom left spot. I've got 4 spots to fill. The top left spot here is where my arc is going to go, which in this case is 3 pi inches from the question. So I put 3 pi up here. And then over here I have my central angle, which I don't know. That's what it's asking me to find. What is the angle? And I have that over 360. This looks kind of like a 2. It's meant to be a question mark. Okay, so I got 3 pi over 8 pi equals x over 360. I'm going to cancel the pi's out here just to make it a little simpler. So I have 3 over 8 equals what over 360. This is just solving a proportion just like we've been doing for months now. So I can do fish method, 360 times 3 divided by 8. And in your calculator, that'll tell you that it's 135 degrees, which you can submit as your answer. We'll do one last one here. In this one, it's asking what is HJ. It's just asking for that in degrees. This one's nice and easy. You see here that this arc length is 142 degrees. This one's 72 degrees. If I want to find out what's missing, I can just say, well, I know all of them together have to add up to 360. So let me do 360 minus 142, which leaves me at 218. And then I take another 72 away from that, which leaves me with 146, I think. Let's hope that's right and see what comes out. Okay, good. And then this one here, again, is just adding angles. And if we get this one right, then I don't know if you'll see, but we'll actually be at 85. So you would know how to do this one. Okay, so good luck with this, guys. You can do it.